The prairie stretched out like a vast ocean of gold, the grass swaying under the last breath of the sun. Evening rode slowly across the land, painting everything in copper and shadow. The air was heavy with dust, the kind that clings to your skin and settles deep into your lungs. In the distance, the little town of Dry Creek sat quiet, its wooden buildings leaning like tired old men after a long day. This is where her story begins. She was not the kind of woman ballads were sung about in saloons. No one wrote songs for women who carried their lives on calloused hands, who stitched their own dresses and patched roofs in the heat of summer. But she had a strength that did not shout. It hummed, quiet and steady, like a hymn carried by the wind. Her name was Clara. Clara had eyes the color of the evening sky, soft gray-blue, but they carried storms inside them. She was young still, yet the world had aged her heart. Folks in town often whispered she was too proud, too stubborn, too strange. But the truth was simpler. Clara had lived through more loss than many men twice her age, and she learned to hide her wounds beneath silence. Every morning she rose before the rooster crowed. She fetched water from the well, milked the lone cow, swept her porch. In the afternoons, she taught herself to mend saddles and harnesses. Workmen laughed at her for doing. And every night she sat by the window with a kerosene lamp, holding a locket between her fingers. Inside it, a faded picture of her mother, gone too soon. What Clara wanted most could not be bought with coins or horses. She longed for someone who would see her not as fragile, not as broken, not as a curiosity in a lonely town, but simply as herself. It was in those dusky evenings, when the sky burned and the coyotes cried, that loneliness pressed its heaviest hand upon her. One evening, when the saloon lamps flickered to life and fiddles began their rowdy tune, Clara walked into town. The wooden boards of the walkway creaked under her boots. Men tipped their hats, some with politeness, others with mockery hiding in their smiles. She kept her chin high, even when her cheeks burned, and that is when she first caught the attention of him. His name was Wade, a man whose charm came not from kindness, but from knowing how to use his looks. Tall, with a grin quick as lightning, and a voice smooth as whiskey. Wade had a way of making every woman feel chosen, if only for a fleeting moment. That night, he asked her to dance. His hand was firm on her waist, his breath warm with drink, his words heavy with promises that carried no weight. For the first time in years, Clara felt noticed. Not for her scars, not for her silence, but for being a woman. For weeks, Wade courted her in his shallow way. He brought her flowers from the fields, cheap trinkets from traveling salesmen. He spoke of dreams, a ranch of his own, riches from cattle drives. He told her she was beautiful when the lamplight hid her tired eyes. And though Clara's heart was cautious, it softened beneath the illusion of tenderness. But illusions never last long beneath the wide western sky. One evening, as the town gathered for Sunday supper, Wade saw the scar along her collarbone, a mark left from a childhood fire she rarely spoke of. His smile faltered. His eyes shifted, quick with judgment, as if her worth had slipped away with the sight of that scar. He did not speak of it then, but the change was there, subtle as a rattlesnake in tall grass. His gifts became fewer, his words more hollow. Soon, whispers spread. Wade had told others she was damaged, that he needed a woman without baggage. The betrayal stung, but Clara did not weep where eyes could see. Instead, she stood alone beneath the stars that night, the wind lifting her hair like a banner of defiance. She clutched her locket, whispering to the night sky, as if her mother might still hear her. I was not made to be discarded. The prairie answered only with silence, the kind that carries both comfort and loneliness in the same breath. And so Clara's story moved on, like the river that carves its way through stone, slow, steady, unstoppable. For though Wade thought himself the victor, his shallow heart could not touch the fire smoldering quietly within her. And somewhere on the edge of that prairie, another pair of eyes watched her with a patience Wade could never understand. But that is for another part of the tale. For now, we leave Clara beneath the vast, starlit dome of the wild west night. Alone, Yes, but not defeated. Her spirit burning quietly, waiting for the kind of love that does not turn away from scars. The prairie has a way of healing slow, the way water smooths stone over years. Wounds do not close overnight, and Clara knew this truth better than most. Wade's betrayal left her with silence heavier than words. She carried it like a shawl over her shoulders, walking through town with her chin still high, though her heart trembled beneath the weight. Folks whispered, some with pity, some with cruelty, but Clara had long grown used to whispers. She wore them like dust on her boots. It was in the small moments, when she was bending to gather firewood, or hauling water, or patching a rip in her skirt, that the loneliness crept in like an unwelcome shadow. Yet even then, she never let the world see her falter. One afternoon, with the sky stretched wide and cloudless, Clara's wagon will split on a rocky trail just outside Dry Creek. The sun blazed overhead, the air sharp with heat. She crouched beside the wheel, her hands stained with dust and sweat, wrestling with a stubborn bolt that refused to budge. That was when she heard footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, each one pressing into the dirt with the patience of a man who never rushed the world. Clara turned and saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, his shirt worn but clean, his hat pulled low to shade steady eyes. His name was Elias. Elias was no stranger to Dry Creek, though he lived on the outskirts, tending his modest ranch with a pair of horses and more cattle than one man alone should manage. Folks said he was quiet as the desert night, a man who spoke only when words were needed. Clara had seen him before, tipping his hat in town, never lingering, never boasting. Now he stood a few paces away, watching her struggle with the broken wheel. He said nothing at first, just studied the wagon, then crouched down beside it. His hands were strong, his movements sure. Without asking, he took the stubborn bolt in his grip and turned it free, as though it were nothing more than a knot in a piece of twine. Clara wanted to thank him, but the words tangled on her tongue. She was used to men who demanded payment for kindness, a smile, a promise, something in return. Yet Elias simply fixed the wheel, wiped the sweat from his brow, and nodded once. Stubborn thing, he muttered softly, his voice deep and calm, like water drawn from a well. Then he stood, tipped his hat, and started back down the trail. Clara stared after him, bewildered. He had asked for nothing, expected nothing, and for a woman whose worth had been weighed and measured too many times, that small grace was a miracle. Days passed, and she found herself noticing Elias in ways she hadn't before. He came into town on Wednesdays, selling butter and eggs at the general store. He spoke little, but when he did, it was plain and steady. She caught his eyes once, and though they were quiet eyes, they did not dart away like Wade's had when he'd seen her scars. Instead, Elias looked at her as though he were seeing the whole of her, not the parts the world whispered about. One evening, Clara walked to the edge of town, where the prairie grass grew tall. She found Elias mending a fence along his land. She stopped, unsure if she was intruding, but he simply leaned on the post and listened when she spoke. "I've mended things all my life," she told him, her voice thin as smoke. "But some things don't fix so easy." Elias didn't rush to answer. He let the words settle in the air, then said some breaks don't go back the way they were, but sometimes they hold stronger for it. Clara held his gaze, and in that moment, something quiet but unshakable settled between them. It was not love, not yet, but it was a beginning, the first green shoot after a long winter. Clara's days unfolded with new rhythm. Sometimes she found herself walking past Elias's ranch, carrying bread she'd baked or apples she'd gathered. Sometimes he rode into town and offered her a lift back when the road grew dark. Their conversations were never grand, never rushed. A word here, a glance there, silence filling the spaces in ways that felt safe. By the firelight of his ranch one evening, they shared coffee in tin cups. Clara's fingers brushed his when she passed him the pot, and for a moment she felt the ground steady beneath her feet in a way it hadn't in years. It was then she began to see him not only as a man, but as a presence, like the horizon itself, patient, unmovable, eternal. Not everyone welcomed the sight of them together. Wade's jealousy grew like a sickness. He lingered in saloons, his words bitter, his laughter sharp. He spread whispers that Clara had been desperate, that she clung to Elias only because Wade had cast her aside. A few weak-hearted folks believed him, but others began to see Wade's charm for what it was, a mask cracked at the edges. Still, the whispers reached Clara's ears, and for a night, her old fears returned. Was she only ever to be judged by the men who chose or rejected her? Was her worth still tied to another's voice? But Elias, steady Elias, did not let the shadows linger. One evening, when the town's murmur grew loudest, he walked beside her down the main street. Not with grand gestures, not with declarations. He simply walked, his arm brushing hers, his presence making it clear to every watching eye that she was not alone. The whispers faltered. Clara lifted her chin higher, this time not with defiance, but with a quiet pride that warmed her bones. Side characters added their weight to her journey too. Old May, the saloon keeper, with hair white as prairie snow, took Clara aside one night. She wiped glasses with a cloth and said, "Don't let fools tell your story, child. Write it yourself." And Ruthie, the widow raising 2 young boys, shared bread with Clara and whispered, "The strongest love is the kind that steadies, not the kind that dazzles." Each voice stitched another piece of strength into her. The nights on the prairie grew cooler as autumn set in. Clara found herself at Elias's ranch more often, helping him mend fences, tending to calves born late in the season. Once, when she cut her hand on a piece of wire, Elias reached out, steady and unhurried, and wrapped her hand in his bandana. His touch was careful, respectful, as though he feared pressing against her hurt. And in that touch, she felt something stirred deep within, a promise not yet spoken, but alive all the same. Clara's heart, cautious as a wild colt, began to believe again. Not in quicksilver charm, not in empty promises whispered under lamplight, but in the quiet strength of a man who saw her, scars, silence, stubborn pride, and all. The prairie sky stretched wide overhead, the stars burning steady. And for the first time in years, Clara felt steady too. The dust of her loneliness began to settle, and in its place, footsteps marked a new path, 2 sets side by side, walking into a horizon she dared to hope for. But storms brew quietly on the horizon, and not every heart is kind enough to let love grow unchallenged. For while Clara and Elias built something tender in the quiet dust, Wade's envy gathered like thunder in the distance. And the prairie, wide and wild, was not done testing them yet. The prairie does not rush its seasons. Spring waits beneath the snow, summer lingers in the wheat fields, autumn whispers before frost. Love, too, grows slow in a land where patience is the only thing that survives the long miles of dust and silence. For Clara, love did not arrive like a storm. It did not sweep her off her feet or burn her with sudden fire. Instead, it came the way dawn touches the plains, gently, almost unnoticed at first, until suddenly the whole horizon is alight. Her days began to braid themselves with Elias's. At dawn, she sometimes rode out to his ranch, her horse's hooves thudding softly against the earth. Elias would already be working, mending fences, leading horses to water, carrying feed. He did not treat her presence as intrusion. He only lifted his head, gave a small nod, and continued, as though her being there had always been a given. Clara helped where she could. She carried hay, brushed the horses, stitched harness leather when it split. The work left her hands raw, but it filled her with something she hadn't felt in years, purpose shared with another. One evening, after hours of mending a stubborn fence post, they rested by the fire. The sun was bleeding out across the horizon, the sky burning in streaks of red and violet. Clara sat with her knees drawn up, watching the flames lick the wood. "Do you ever get tired of the silence out here?" she asked, her voice soft. Elias sipped from his tin cup, considering. Silence isn't empty. It's full of what you put in it. Clara looked at him, and for the first time, she realized that the silence between them wasn't hollow. It was safe. Their bond deepened not through grand words, but through the simplest gestures. When Clara's roof leaked after an autumn storm, Elias showed up with wood and nails, fixing it without being asked. When one of Elias's calves fell ill, Clara stayed up all night beside him, her hands steady on the lantern, her voice calm as he worked to save the animal. When Clara grew weary of the town's whispers, Elias stood by her side at Sunday service, his quiet presence louder than any defense she could have spoken. It was in these small acts that Clara's guarded heart began to soften fully. Yet, love does not grow in peace alone. It grows against struggle, against fear. One night, beneath a harvest moon, Clara finally spoke of the scar on her collarbone, the one Wade had sneered at. She told Elias of the fire that had taken her childhood home, of how she had carried her mother out through the smoke, but could not save her father, how the flame had kissed her skin and left its mark forever. Her voice trembled as she spoke. She had carried this story like a stone for so long, afraid that telling it would make her smaller, weaker. Elias listened in silence, his eyes steady. When she finished, she turned away, ashamed of the tears on her face. But Elias only reached out, slow and sure, and touched her scar with the gentleness of a man handling glass. "Strength isn't the absence of scars," he said quietly. "It's carrying them and still standing." Clara closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she did not feel broken. She felt whole. But while love grew steady between them, shadows thickened on the horizon. Wade had not let go of his bitterness. Rejection had twisted him into something meaner, darker. He spent his nights in the saloon, his voice slurred with whiskey, telling anyone who'd listen that Clara thought herself better than him. He mocked Elias's silence, called him a coward, said Clara was desperate enough to cling to any man who'd have her. The words spread like smoke. Some dismissed them, tired of Wade's venom. Others repeated them, hungry for gossip. And though Clara tried to ignore it, the whispers reached her ears. One afternoon, she walked through town and felt the eyes on her back. She heard laughter behind her, and when she glanced toward the saloon porch, there was Wade, leaning against a post, smirking. Her hands curled into fists, but she kept walking, her head held high. Later that evening, when she told Elias what had happened, he looked at her for a long moment. "Do his words change who you are?" Elias asked softly. "No," Clara admitted. "Then let them die in the dust where they belong." Still, she could see in Elias's eyes that he was not blind to the danger. Wade was not a man content with words alone. His pride was a brittle thing, and brittle things break with violence. The town itself seemed to sense the tension building. The air felt charged like before storm. People spoke in hushed tones when Elias and Clara walked together. Some offered quiet nods of respect. Others looked away, as though expecting trouble to come of it. And trouble was indeed stirring. Wade confronted Elias once in the general store. Elias had been buying nails, Clara beside him. Wade swaggered in, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "Didn't think you'd stoop so low, Elias. Taking what I cast aside." The room fell silent. Clara's cheeks burned, but Elias did not rise to the bait. He set the nails on the counter, paid the clerk, and turned to go. But before he left, he looked at Wade, not with anger, but with a calm that cut deeper. "She was never yours to cast aside." Then he walked out, leaving Wade fuming, his pride bruised before the whole town. That night, Wade's laughter in the saloon was sharp as broken glass. His bitterness had become a fire, and fire, once lit, does not go out quietly. The prairie winds grew restless as autumn waned. Thunderheads gathered far off, rolling dark across the sky. Clara and Elias stood together on the porch of her cabin one evening, watching lightning flicker at the edge of the horizon. "Storm's coming," Elias murmured. Clara knew he spoke of more than weather. She leaned against him, her heart steady despite the distant thunder. For she had learned something Wade could never take from her. Love, true love, is not the fire that consumes. It is the fire that warms, that steadies, that endures the night. Still, storms cannot be avoided forever. And in Dry Creek, the storm was almost upon them. The prairie always warns of storms. The wind grows restless, carrying grit that stings the eyes. Horses shift uneasily in their pens. The air thickens, heavy as a held breath. In Dry Creek, the storm had been gathering not in the clouds, but in men's hearts. Wade's bitterness had swelled until there was no room left in him for anything else. The saloon could no longer hold his venom. It spilled into the streets, into whispers, into threats muttered beneath his whiskey breath. And, at last, the storm broke. It was a Sunday evening. The townsfolk had gathered near the church, the air rich with the scent of stew and cornbread. Lanterns glowed, children chased one another, boots scuffed the dusty ground. Clara stood among them, her hand brushing against Elias's, a quiet comfort in the simple act of standing side by side. But Wade was there too, his hat low, his eyes burning with the fever of pride wounded too many times. He watched Clara, watched Elias, and something in him snapped. He stepped forward, his voice rising above the chatter. "Elias," he called, sharp as a whip crack. "Seems you've made a habit of taking what don't belong to you." The crowd stilled. The air grew tight like a rope pulled taut. Clara's heart thundered in her chest. But Elias's face was calm as ever, his eyes steady on Wade. "She was never yours," Elias said softly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Wade sneered. His hand hovered near the gun at his side, fingers twitching. "Then let's settle it. Here and now. A man's honor don't survive long in a town like this." The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Dry Creek was no stranger to gunfights, but each one left scars on the town that never quite healed. Folks shifted nervously, mothers pulling children close, men whispering of what was about to unfold. Clara stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "This isn't about honor, Wade. It's about your pride. And pride is nothing but empty wind." For a moment, her words seemed to catch him off guard. But pride, once stoked, does not extinguish easy. Wade spat on the ground, his hand tightening near his gun. Elias stepped between Clara and Wade, his presence a wall of calm. He did not reach for his weapon. He only looked at Wade with steady eyes, the kind that hold more weight than bullets. "You think strength is pulling a trigger," Elias said quietly. "But strength is knowing when not to." The crowd hushed, waiting. Wade's chest heaved, his fury boiling over. In the silence, the cicadas sang, the lanterns flickered, the night itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a snarl, Wade drew his gun. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara's breath caught in her throat. But Elias did not move for his own weapon. Instead, Clara herself stepped forward, placing herself in Wade's line of fire. Her voice rang out, clear as a bell. "If you shoot, it won't prove you're man. It will only prove what we all already know, that you're a coward." The word struck Wade harder than a bullet. The crowd stirred, whispers rising. Faces turned toward him not with fear, but with contempt. Wade's hand trembled. His eyes darted from Clara to Elias, to the townsfolk who no longer looked at him with respect, but with pity and scorn. And in that moment, Wade's power crumbled. With a choked sound, he lowered his gun. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of his own shame. He turned and stumbled into the darkness, swallowed by the night, leaving behind only silence and the faint echo of his broken pride. The danger had passed, but Clara's legs shook beneath her. Elias reached out, steadying her with his hand. She looked up at him, eyes shining with tears she had not let fall until now. "You didn't draw," she whispered. "I didn't need to," Elias said softly. "You were stronger than both of us." In that moment, Clara realized what love truly meant. Not rescue, not possession, not shallow words whispered under lantern light, but a steady hand when the world shook. A presence that did not demand, but simply remained. Elias had not saved her. He had stood beside her while she saved herself. And that was the kind of love she had long prayed for beneath the prairie stars. The crowd began to disperse, voices low but filled with awe. Some tipped their hats to Clara. Others offered nods of respect. For the first time in years, she felt not like a whisper on the edge of town, but a voice clear and strong, belonging to the land itself. Later, as the town settled back into quiet, Clara and Elias walked beyond Dry Creek, out into the open prairie. The storm clouds had broken apart, the sky wide and clear. Stars glittered above them, countless and eternal. Clara lifted her face to the night. The wind was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of sage and earth washed clean. Elias's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing, steady and sure. For a long while they said nothing. Words were too small for the moment. At last, Clara whispered, "I used to think my scars made me less, but now I see they are proof I survived." Elias squeezed her hand gently. "And that, Clara, is where your beauty lives." The prairie stretched wide before them, endless as their future. The night held no whispers now, only the steady promise of love that endured, love that did not falter at the sight of wounds, love that burned like the stars, quiet, eternal, unshakable. And so the story of Clara did not end in loneliness, nor in defeat. It ended, as all true stories of the heart should, in the steady flame of a love that saw her for all she was, scars and strength alike. My dear listener, perhaps you too carry scars. Perhaps you too have known the sting of rejection, the ache of being unseen. Remember Clara's story. Remember that love worth keeping is not dazzled by perfection. It is steady, patient, unafraid of the marks life has left on you. You are not less because of your scars. You are more because of them. And so, as the fire burns low and this tale of the Wild West settles into your heart, I ask you, where are you listening from tonight? The prairies of Texas, the deserts of Nevada, the mountains of Montana, or perhaps far beyond the West itself. If Clara's story touched you, if her strength reminded you of your own, I invite you to stay with us by this fire. Like, share, and subscribe to Wild West Tales, so that more hearts may hear these stories of courage, of love, and of the truths that endure like the stars above the prairie. Until next time, may your nights be steady, and your scars be seen not as wounds, but as proof that you survived.